Remember in the last video when I said this? Yes, you should have your own podcast. And no, it's not difficult. It's actually surprisingly easy. Well, I have a podcast now, but I made some mistakes. In the last video, I interviewed Nalbach. He runs the 9-5 Freedom podcast. And in the interview, he gave away so many podcasting secrets. He gave me the entire blueprint to launching a podcast, including how to launch a podcast with my phone. So I challenged myself to follow his exact steps. And in this video, you're gonna discover how that worked out for me. Hi, my name is Morris and this is my channel CreateGrowProfit. Thank you for tuning in. And if you follow along with this video all the way to the end, then you can launch your podcast too. Let me first give you the outline of all the steps that I went through, and then I'll cover each of the steps individually in more detail. First of all, I had to prepare the episode and I had to plan a little bit what it is that I'm gonna say and what I'm gonna record. After that, I just had to sit down and record myself, then edit the recording and cut out some things that I don't want to have in there or cut out some long silences. Then another thing I did, and this is optional if you just want to launch, but I recorded an intro and an outro with some music. This step is optional, but I wanted to do it anyways just for fun. Then I had to create an image, some kind of visual that I can upload to the different podcasting platforms so that people can see an image for my podcast. And at that point, all that was left to do is upload it and share the episode with friends, clients, and other people that I know. All right, so let's begin with step number 1, preparing the podcast episode and deciding what it is that I'm gonna say. Basically, when you prepare your podcast episode, there's 2 ways to go about it. Either you'll invite a guest for an interview or conversation, or you'll do a solo episode where you just record yourself talking about a topic. For this first episode, I decided to do a solo episode, and Nick has provided me with a clear structure to what I need to cover in such a solo episode to make it an interesting episode, and he calls it the hero's journey. The hero's journey consists of 7 questions. The first one being, who is the main character? Then, what does the character want? The third question is, why can't they get what they want? Question number 4 is, what are the stakes? In other words, what happens if they can't reach their goal? Question number 4 is, who or what can help them? Question number 6 is, how do they get what they want? And then question number 7 is, what is the transformation? In other words, what is their life going to look like once they've achieved their goal? So I took these 7 questions and I wrote them down on a piece of paper, and I just started writing down some notes. And quite quickly, I came up with the idea to explain why my coaching and consulting business is called CreateGrowProfit. Once I had the main structure outlined, I wrote out the first few paragraphs word by word that made up the introduction, and then I just followed the bullet points that I had listed out after answering the 7 questions of the hero's journey. And with that, step number 1 was complete, and I think it took me around 45 minutes to have my podcast episode prepared and be ready to record. So now let's talk about step number 2, the recording, and this is actually where I made most of my mistakes and where I wasted quite a bit of time. So as you can see, I have a pretty good mic here. But to follow Nick's beginner guide and to prove that you really can launch a podcast without any fancy equipment, I decided to record it on my phone. Now, there are ways how to improve the recording quality on your phone with a lavalier mic that you can attach to your t-shirt or shirt. And there are even ways to connect a USB mic like this to the phone, but I didn't do any of that. I wanted to keep it as simple as possible and stick to the challenge. And so I sat down with my scripted out intro and the notes for the rest of the episode, and I just hit the record button on my phone. I used the native recording app. I didn't download any special recording app. I just used whichever recorder was on my phone, and I held the phone near my mouth and just started recording and speaking. I did a little test first where I recorded myself for 1 or 2 minutes just to make sure the quality was fine and everything sounded well. So then I went ahead, recorded the entire thing It was about 10 minutes, and I was really happy about that because now it's recorded and feels like the hardest part was done. So I transferred the audio file to my computer, started editing it to cut out some awkward silences, and then about in the middle of the recording, I noticed that there were a lot of annoying hissing sounds in my voice. What happened was that I was holding the phone too close to my mouth, and when I spoke, I would blow air into the microphone. But the thing was, I really liked what I had recorded. And so I thought to myself, how can I repeat what I said in almost the same way without wasting too much time on this? So then I was looking for a transcription service that can take my audio recording and turn it into a transcribed text. And I found this site called podcastle.ai, where 1 hour of transcription service is free, and this is all I needed. So now that I had the entire transcript, I read through it and I changed a few things, but essentially I kept almost everything the same. And then next I had to figure out how to record myself again on the phone without recreating this annoying hissing sound and without blowing air into my phone's mic as I speak. And what I figured out is that the most important thing is that my phone never moves and I keep my same head position for the entire recording. So the simplest way was to just put my phone on my desk and then sit in front of it and hit record and not touch anything and just speak. That worked really well. There were no more hissing sounds and the audio quality was virtually the same. However, I will say that I could have definitely improved the audio quality even more if I had recorded it in a much smaller room. I could have even recorded it under a blanket. Again, the whole point is to keep it as simple as possible. It worked for me, it's definitely doable, and it's totally fine to launch your podcast like that. So I wasted my entire day on figuring this out, but now looking back, if I had just done this properly from the start, this step would have taken me maybe 15 minutes. Just make sure you follow these very important tips that I've just given you. Don't hold the phone in your hand, place the phone on a flat surface in front of you, and if you can, record yourself in a closet or very small room to avoid any echo and improve the audio quality. So now step 2 is completed. I've recorded the episode, and now in step 3, I want to edit it just a little bit, remove any awkward silences, and just clean it up a little. I have the Microsoft OneDrive app installed on my phone. So what I did is I uploaded the audio recording to my OneDrive, and then on my computer I could download it from my OneDrive to my computer. You can also use other services like Dropbox or Google Drive. Now in my case, the audio recording was a .m4a file, and to edit it with Audacity, it needed to be an .mp3 file. So I downloaded a free software called VLC Media Player, and with that free software I could convert the audio recording from .m4a into a .mp3 file. Then I opened Audacity. It is a free software to edit audio files. So I launched Audacity and I clicked and dragged the audio recording into Audacity. I hit play and started listening to my recording. Whenever I felt like there was too long of a silence, or if I repeated myself unnecessarily, I could just highlight that section, click delete on the keyboard, and remove it from the recording. Once I was done with that, I could export it directly from Audacity as a new .mp3 file, and that was essentially my podcast episode. Nicely edited, clean, and ready to be listened to. So step number 3 is completed now as well. And in step number 4, I wanted to create an intro and outro with some music. Now, this is entirely optional. I have listened to podcasts who don't have an intro. I just think it was a fun thing to do, so I went ahead and did it anyways. The first thing I needed to figure out was where I can get music that I can use legally and without any copyright or royalty issues in my podcast, and then upload it to Spotify. Nick provided me some helpful links, and I did a little bit of my own research as well, and eventually I found a song that I liked on pixabay.com, so I just downloaded that song, and I also made sure I downloaded the license file just in case sometime in the future someone wants to see that. And then once again I started up Audacity, but this time I used this mic here to record the intro. My intro is very short. I just introduce myself, explain what the podcast is all about, and then play the background music over it just for a few seconds, and then tune it out to go straight into the episode. I'm gonna play the intro now for you to hear. Welcome to the Create Grow Profit podcast. I'm your host, Maurice Grand, and this is the show where we talk about launching online businesses and scaling online businesses to the next level. I also did the same thing for the outro, where I just mentioned the name of my website, CreateGrowProfit.com, my social media platforms, and then played the same music again for a few seconds before ending the episode. Visit CreateGrowProfit.com for a written summary of this episode. Follow me on Twitter under @TheMauriceGrand and on Instagram under @CreateGrowProfit. Then I opened Audacity one more time. I added the intro, the main podcast episode where I talk, and the outro, and I exported the entire thing as one single MP3 file. Again, the intro and outro is optional. You don't need to have this or do this to launch your podcast. If you don't have time for this right now, don't worry about it, but at least you'll know how to do it if you want to add an intro and outro sometime in the future. And so step number 4 was completed, and we move on to step number 5, where I created a very simple image to show my podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google, and all these platforms. I already have a logo and the photo, and I just mashed it together into one single image and used that. But then later I saw that Canva has really great podcast images. So for you, I highly recommend that you just go to canva.com and in the search bar type in podcast, and then you will see that a bunch of podcast image templates appear, and they're already in a square shape. This is really important. For all the podcasting platforms, they require a square image for your podcast, and they recommend a size of 3000 by 3000 pixels. And so with editing the audio and searching for music, creating the intro and the outro, and creating the image, that took me probably around 1 more hour to do all these steps. Now that step number 5 is completed, we can move on to step number 6, and all we have to do is upload our episode to the different podcasting platforms. Now, Nick recommended that I use Anchor.fm. I used that site and it worked really well. It was so easy to do. I highly recommend that you sign up for Anchor.fm as well and use that page to upload your podcast to the most important podcasting platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcast, and Google. I have found the steps on Anchor.fm very easy to use, but if you're stuck anywhere, leave a comment below this video, let me know, and then I can also record a step-by-step video showing you how to set yourself up with Anchor.fm. But really all you have to do is create your account, add the name for your podcast, write a description for your podcast, upload your podcast episode MP3 file, and add the image that you've created for your podcast. It is really that simple. All in all, it took me about 15 minutes to get set up with Anchor.fm and upload my podcast and my first podcast episode. After I hit publish, a couple minutes later, I could already see my podcast on Spotify. I have to say I was super proud seeing my podcast up there on Spotify and being able to see it on my phone, on my computer and tablet. And I'm sure when you will see your podcast live on Spotify and Apple Podcast and Google Podcast and so on, then you will feel really good about it as well. So that means step number 6 is completed. And then step number 7 was just spreading the word about my new podcast, telling friends about it, telling my clients about it, telling it just other people who know me on social media in my Facebook group, sending out an email to my newsletter subscribers. You know how it works. You just want to let everyone know and hope that they will enjoy listening to the podcast. So it actually took me 2 days to launch my podcast, but it would have taken me only about 2.5 hours if I hadn't done all these mistakes with my audio recording. But if you learn from my mistakes and follow the exact steps that I've just told you here in this video, then I'm sure you can launch your podcast in 2.5 hours, or maybe even less. Now, I want to give you some very important takeaways. And the main question is really, should you run a podcast with just your phone, or should you invest into a mic like this? And if you listen to the podcast episode on Spotify or wherever you like to listen, then you will definitely hear the difference between the intro, which I recorded with this microphone, and the entire podcast episode where I speak that I recorded on the phone. And because you can hear the difference, once I switch to the phone, it sounds bad at first, but as you get used to it, personally, I find that it's not annoying or distracting. But if I had just recorded the entire thing on my phone, then I don't think you would notice as much, or maybe not even notice at all, depending on your audio standards. So what I'm trying to say is that I think Nick is absolutely right. You can launch a podcast with just your phone, and I don't think not having a microphone like this should hold you back. But when you realize that you love podcasting and you want to do this long term, then definitely I recommend investing into a microphone like this one here. I am using the Yeti Blue, but there are so many different ones which work just as well. And the other question that always comes up, should you do solo episodes or should you invite a guest? Here again, I think Nick was spot on. It is definitely easier recording episodes with a guest, interviewing them, having conversations. I think when you get really good at having conversations and interviewing people, you could possibly even just record the entire interview and not have to edit anything afterwards. But with a solo episode, I think chances are very high that you're gonna have some awkward silences or lose your train of thought, and you'll have to cut that out afterwards with a software like Audacity. So my number one recommendation is start your podcast, follow along with this video. It's gonna take you about 2 to 2.5 hours. Don't be afraid to use your phone. Don't wait for the perfect setup to start. Just take action, launch your podcast, have fun with it, and I promise you'll feel good about yourself when you see your podcast on Spotify. If you enjoyed this episode, please like the video and subscribe to my channel, CreateGrowProfit. Click the button below the video right now so you don't forget. For any links and resources, check the description below this video as well. And I'll also put a link to my blog in there where you will find a written summary of this video. And if you haven't seen yet my interview with Nick, make sure you click this video here right now. It's a very in-depth interview about podcasting. Nick shared a lot of insights, and it is only thanks to him that I was able to record my podcast so smoothly with minimal equipment and very little software. My name is Morris. You were watching Create Grow Profit. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you in the next episode.